There are moments you never forget. No matter how much time passes, no matter how hard you try to erase them, no matter how many therapists you see, they stay. Burned in, frozen, permanent. For me, it was a Thursday afternoon, March 17th. Nothing special, nothing extraordinary, just another ordinary day in my ordinary life. Or at least that's what I thought. I was running late as usual, grabbing my keys, rushing around, looking for my purse, yelling to my mom that I was leaving. She was in the kitchen, making that coffee she always made in the middle of the afternoon. The smell still haunts me to this day. I passed by the kitchen doorway without stopping, threw a eye over my shoulder, without looking at her, without pausing, without hugging her. I was irritated. I don't even remember why anymore. Some stupid thing, something insignificant. Maybe she said something that bothered me. Maybe I was just in a bad mood. But I remember the irritation. I remember being impatient. I remember wanting to get out of that house. And I remember the goodbye. Cold, quick, automatic. Bye, Mom. 2 words. The last 2 words I ever said to her. Because 4 hours later, I got the call. I was sitting in traffic when the phone rang. It was my dad. And from his voice, I already knew. Before he even spoke, I already knew. Your mom collapsed. We called an ambulance, but by the time they got here, she was already gone. It was her heart. It was quick. She didn't suffer. I don't remember hanging up the phone. I don't remember pulling over. I don't remember crying. I only remember one thing. That goodbye. That goddamn cold goodbye I'd given her 4 hours earlier. And in that moment, in that exact moment, something inside me broke in a way I didn't know was possible. Because it wasn't just the pain of losing her. It wasn't just the shock of knowing she was gone. It was the sharp, excruciating, unbearable awareness that I could never fix that moment. Never. I could never go back to that kitchen, never hug her for real, never say, Mom, I'm sorry I was annoyed, but I love you so much. Never. And that word never became the heaviest weight I've ever carried in my life. In the days that followed, I functioned on autopilot. Viewing, funeral, people, hugs, condolences, everyone saying I'm so sorry, everyone saying she's in a better place now, everyone saying time heals. But nobody knew. Nobody knew what was really destroying me. Because to everyone, I was grieving. And I was. But it wasn't just grief. It was something so much worse. It was guilt. A guilt that grew every single day. A guilt that woke me up at 3 a.m. A guilt that turned every good memory into something painful. Because every time I remembered her smiling, every time I remembered happy moments, the first thing that came to my mind was that goodbye. That cold goodbye. That irritated goodbye. That last goodbye. And I started torturing myself. What if I'd stayed just 5 more minutes? What if I'd stopped to have coffee with her? What if I'd hugged her before leaving? What if I'd said I love you? What if? What if? What if? Those 2 words became my prison. I spent months punishing myself. Months replaying that moment. Months imagining alternate versions where I did it differently. Where I stopped. Where I looked at her. Where I said, Mom, I love you. But that version didn't exist. The only real version was the one where I left annoyed. Where I gave a cold goodbye. Where I wasted my last chance. And the more I thought about it, the deeper I sank. I started having panic attacks. Waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, heart racing. I'd dream I was in that kitchen again, but when I tried to hug her, I'd wake up. Always woke up before I could. And during the day, I pretended I was okay. People would say you're being so strong. You're handling this so well. Your mom would be so proud. But I wasn't being strong. I was falling apart on the inside. And the worst part was I couldn't talk about it. How was I supposed to explain to someone that what hurt the most wasn't her death but the way I said goodbye? How was I supposed to say I felt guilty over something so small, so insignificant? So I kept it in, hid it, carried it alone. Until one night 6 months after the funeral, I was at my aunt's house. We were looking through old photos of my mom, laughing at some, crying at others. And suddenly my aunt picked up a specific photo. It was me and my mom. I must have been about 8 years old. We were hugging, smiling. And my aunt looked at me and said, "You know, this was her favorite picture?" She kept it in her wallet, showed it to everyone, said this was the happiest day of her life. And I looked at that photo, at that hug, at that smile. And without meaning to, I started crying. Not a controlled cry, but a desperate cry. A cry from someone who'd been holding it in for months. And my aunt hugged me and asked what was happening. And for the first time, I told her. I told her about that goodbye, about the irritation, about the guilt, about how I hated myself for not stopping, for not hugging her, for not saying I love you. And my aunt grabbed me by the shoulders, looked me in the eyes, and said something that changed everything. She said, "Do you really think your mom would remember that last day or all the other ones? Do you think she'd spend eternity thinking about that goodbye or that hug in the photo? Do you think your love for each other fits into one single moment?" And in that instant, something inside me cracked. Because I'd spent 6 months focused on one single moment, one single day, one single goodbye. And I'd forgotten about all the others. I'd forgotten about the thousands of hugs I gave her, the thousands of I love yous I said, the thousands of good moments we lived together. I'd let that last day erase 28 years of love. And right there in that living room looking at that photo, I understood something. My mom didn't leave remembering that cold goodbye. She left knowing she was loved. Because love isn't measured by the last moment. It's measured by all the moments. And suddenly, all those questions that had been torturing me started losing their power. What if I'd stayed 5 more minutes? It wouldn't change the fact that I'd spent thousands of other hours with her. What if I'd hugged her that day? It wouldn't erase all the other hugs I gave. What if I'd said I love you? It wouldn't make it more true than it already was. Because she already knew. She always knew. And this understanding didn't come like lightning. It wasn't instant. It was a slow, painful process of deconstructing the guilt I'd built up. In the months that followed, I started therapy, and my therapist helped me understand something important. That the guilt I was feeling wasn't about my mom, it was about me. It was about my need for control. About the illusion that I could have changed what happened. About the fantasy that if I'd done things differently, she'd still be here. But the truth is, she wouldn't. She would have been gone anyway. And that cold goodbye or that tight hug wouldn't have changed that. What would have changed was only how I felt afterwards. And even that wasn't absolute truth. Because I could have given the tightest hug in the world and still found something to blame myself for. Should have stayed longer. Should have said more things. Should have done it differently. Guilt always finds a way. So I needed to learn to forgive. Not her, because she never blamed me, but myself. And that was the hardest process of my life. Forgiving myself for being human, for being annoyed that day, for not knowing it would be the last time, for not being perfect. I started doing something my therapist suggested. Every night before bed, I'd write a letter to my mom. At first, they were letters full of apologies. "Mom, forgive me. Mom, I'm so sorry. Mom, I wish I'd done it differently." But over time, they started to change. I started writing about good memories, about funny things we lived through, about lessons she taught me. And in one of those letters, I wrote something that set me free. I wrote, "Mom, I know you don't remember that last goodbye. You remember all the other ones, all the hugs, all the laughs, all the love. And I'm going to remember those too." And that night, I finally slept peacefully. Not because the pain was gone, but because it had changed shape. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was longing. And longing I could carry. Longing was about love, about gratitude, about honoring who was gone by living fully. Today, it's been 3 years, and I still miss her every single day. Still cry when I see something that reminds me of her. Still pick up the phone to call before remembering she's not here anymore. But I don't blame myself anymore. Because I understood that cold goodbye doesn't define our relationship. What defines it are the thousands of other moments. The afternoon coffees, the late night talks, the hugs for no reason. The I love yous said and unsaid. That's what remains. That's what matters. And if I could go back to that day, March 17th, of course I'd stop. Of course I'd hug her. Of course I'd say I love you. But not because she needed to hear it, because I needed to have done it. For me, not for her. Because she already knew. She always knew. And today when I remember her, I don't remember that goodbye anymore. I remember her smile, her laugh, the way she looked at me, the unconditional love she had for me. And I honor that by living without guilt, living without regret, living the way she would have wanted me to live. Fully. If you're listening to this right now and you're carrying some regret about someone you lost, I want to tell you something. That moment doesn't define everything. The person you lost knew your heart way better than that last day. And if you could ask them what they remember, I guarantee it wouldn't be that imperfect goodbye. It would be all the moments of love you lived together. So stop punishing yourself for being human. Stop thinking you should have known. You couldn't have known. Nobody can. Stop turning one bad moment into a life sentence of guilt. And start honoring who is gone in the only way that really matters. By living, by loving, by being grateful. Because that's what they'd want. That's what they deserve. Not your guilt, but your full life. I'm still learning. Still have hard days. Still have moments where the guilt tries to come back. But now I know what to do. I breathe. I remember. I give thanks. And I keep living. For her. For me. For all the love we shared. If this story touched you in some way, if you're also carrying a what if that haunts you, know that you're not alone. And that the path to peace isn't changing the past. It's making peace with it. Subscribe to this channel for more real stories from the midnight hours. Stories about pain, about healing, about transformation. Because we all carry something. And maybe sharing is the beginning of freedom. Thank you for listening. We'll meet again at the next midnight. And may you find peace with your what ifs, because they don't define who you are or how much you loved.